Hello students, it has been pleasure teaching you all on the rest part of your ninth unit titled I believe that books will never disappear. Let's take a look at the previous class to now about what I taught you the other day. In our last class, I spoke about the opinion of the author in writing a book. Besides, we also came across about how far does a book go away from the author's opinion. In our previous class, it was made clear by Olifano after mentioning a statement by Bernard Shaw, who was a well known and foremost critic who had a profound impact on the Western theatre. What had Bernard Shaw written in one of his literary work is that every book worth being reread has been written by the Spirit. Which means if a book is to be read again and again by its readers, when is this possible? Is that when a book enchants or attracts the attention of its readers, it can be read many times by its readers. Here, students, you need to understand one thing, that is, a book may have many readers around it after attracting the students. A reader always seeks something more from a book, which is always kept confidential and from the thing he is unfamiliar with. And when he desires to get something more from it, his attention should be occupied by his attention should be acquired by a book. When is this possible? Is that a writer, when he starts writing a book, it should be written by using by his will or spirit. Then only such a book can be read many times by its readers. This is what Bernard Shaw had written in one of his work. This idea of Bernard Shaw is used in one of the essays of our Luis Borges. On listening to the words of Olifano, Borges completely accepted with the idea of Bernard Shaw. Borges told Olifano, telling him that he completely admitted with the idea of Bernard Shaw, since a book always goes beyond its author's intention. An author's intention is an imperfect one. There might not be any perfection in his intention. Why? Because is that he might be a preconceived while writing it. Many prejudices will occupy a writer while writing it down. He might be in the favor of an object or a person while writing it. And moreover, a writer's intention may not have a wider range of scope. So that author's intention has no wider range of scope. But a book always goes far away from the author's intention. Author's intention is only restricted and is only confined to himself And moreover, author's intention is a meager thing. He has a smaller importance. His intention has a smaller importance, and his intention are imperfect. Why? Because is that, as I told people earlier, he might be a imperfect one while writing a book. In any book or a certain book, there is a something, there is a need for something more. That is what every reader wants to get it. That is what every reader seeks in a book. That is what in the area where desires every reader desires to get something more out of the book. There is always a requirement for something more that is kept all hidden, that is always confidential, that is the thing with which the reader has been unfamiliar. And when a reader is given a book that is an ancient book to read it out, his reading should always be in a way that is a reader is reading all the time that the book has passed, from the era or from the century it was produced, which means when we or a group of readers are given an ancient book to read, our reading should be like this. Our reading should be as if a book has carried its readers all through the centuries, so giving them all the much needed information to the readers that they have sought for. And all through the centuries, the book has witnessed many things, so that the book has provided some information about the things in which it has gone through all through the centuries. It has worked in. From the day it was written till present day, it has carried all the readers all through the centuries, giving them information, a much needed information. The day it was written, from the day it has provided all the information, from the day it was written till the present day. And Borges has opined another thing: a book can be full of errors. While writing a book, a writer has committed many mistakes, but we have somewhere slipped in understanding or identifying them. So a book is full of errors. We the readers can reject or oppose the author's opinion. Why? Because it is a fact that author's opinion are restricted to himself, and the author's opinion may have no wide range of scope, so that we can oppose the author's intentions. We can also show our disapproval with the author or authoress. But a book, here is a contradictory note from the author's opinion to a book. But a book always retains something sacred in it. A book always goes far away from the author's opinion. That's how book always holds something meaningful in it, something valuable in it, and something mortal, a spirituality that always lies in a book. We always worship book. That's how book always retains or holds something meaningful, a worthy one, and the spiritual one as well, and something magical one which can enchant or attract the readers, which brings its readers happiness always. And later In our previous class, we made a move on to now the another thing that's on the poetry when Borges was asked by Olifano about poetry. Olifano asked Borges a question over there, that is, how would he define poetry? Borges, after being asked this question by Olifano, he opined before him, telling him that poetry is something so intimate which we have always been familiar with since our childhood, as we have been prescribed a poetry in our syllabus. Which means what I am trying to tell you people is that we have established an intimate relationship with the poetry since we have been reading poetry as an inevitable part of our English curriculum, so that poetry becomes one of the intimate or lovable thing to all of the readers, and it becomes one of the inevitable or inseparable part of our curriculum. That's how it becomes a necessary or essential one. It can't at all be defined without oversimplifying it, which means here, if we can't oversimplify or if we can't make any poetry a simple one to comprehend it with its full extent, it can't at all be defined, it can't at all be described if we can't make any poetry a simple one until the moment to get the help of a dictionary or a mentor, or to make it a simple, it can't at all be described. Attempting to define poetry is like an attempt to define the color of yellow or love and the fall of leaf in the autumn season, which means here hardly anyone can define the color of yellow love and the fall of leaves in the autumn season, which means here one can find much difficulty in describing these three things. Defining the poetry is as the same as that of the color of yellow love and the fall of leaves in the autumn season. Borges believes that poetry brings us joy and beautiness too. It provides us a beauty from which we draw out a joy or a solace. It's an aesthetic act from which we gain a joy. That's how beauty are real that lies in it. And on the other hand, Borges brings a distinction in between a poetry and a poem by saying poetry may be nothing more than a series of symbols. Poem may be nothing more than a series of symbols. Poem may have only a series of symbols in it, whereas poetry as something more than that of symbols. It includes many things in it, as it is a process of the creation of the inventive work done by a poet or poetess. Poetry is the process of the creation of our poet or poetess, in which he is or her emotions or thoughts are evoked or aroused. Poetry is the poetic act. Here, poetic act contains many things in it. It includes the way how metric, how the tone of the poem is said by a poet or poetess, and the figures of speech are also used in the poetry. That's what a poetic act means to be. Here, poetry, according to our Borges, is the poetic act that always takes place when a writer starts reading it, when a reader starts reading a poem. This poetic act always takes place. It always happens in a very different manner, with a small degree of with a small degree. This poetic act, it appears in a poetry in a very different manner from one poetry to another one. It always This poetic act always takes place when this poetic act takes place. It appears to the eyes of our Borges at that moment when he observes the poetic act. we became we become aware of the poetic act. When a reader it means when a reader starts going through the poetry, after observing a poetic act, he will become aware of the poetic act. poetry is of Poetry is a magical one which enchants the attention of the reader and the mysterious one. Many things are kept hidden in it, and the unexplainable one we can't easily understand, or we can't easily teach someone else. One who seeks a poem, one who looks after the poem, although it's not the incomprehensible, which means it I don't mean that it is not at all understood. We can understand a poem with its full extent after going through it with a after going through any poetry very thoroughly. If any reader doesn't feel or doesn't identify a poetic act, it means that poet has failed in all of his attempts that he put while writing it down. This is the point where I stopped teaching you people. Let's go from here onwards, where Holifano makes a statement here. Borges, what is important in the art of poetry is finding the precise words. Holifano is of the opinion that poetry is an art. It is the process of the creation of an art. In this art of poetry, what becomes more important to identify is that finding out the precise words. We, the readers, must find the precise words. Here, the precise words are the exact words. The exact words are to be added in a poetry. The poetry always demands the precise words or exact words to be added in it. So, poetry always seeks the precise words to be used in it. That's what the precise words always play an important role in making any poetry. That's what Olifano tells Borges here. In response to the saying of Olifano, Borges tells him that to a great extent. He also admits with the opinion of Olifano, telling him that to a very larger extent, finding precise words are more important in the art of poetry. He also accepts with the idea of Olifano that finding the precise words is more important in a poetry. Borges is also Borges opines that by admitting, by accepting with Oliphant's words that to a great extent it becomes more important to identify the precise words in the art of poetry. Those precise words or exact words in the poetry are what elicit the emotion. I told you people earlier that while writing a poem, a poet or poetess may have something in them in the form of emotions or thoughts. These precise words or exact words that are usually in the poetry always elicit, which means arouse or emerge the emotion of the poet or poetess while writing a poetry down. Those precise words which are used in a poetry always evoke or emerge or what we call arouse the emotion of the poet or poetess. I always remember that wonderful line in a poem by Emily Dickinson which can exemplify this. I always remember Borges recalls always that wonderful line in a poem by Emily Dickinson. Here, Emily Dickinson is a poetess of USA, United States of America. She is a poetess of America. She has written a poem titled This Quiet Dust Was Gentlemen and Ladies. She has put the title This. This quiet dust was gentlemen and ladies. Our Borges always recalls or remembers that wonderful or great line. Though it is a title of this poem, this line is repeated many times in the entire poem. This becomes the title of this poem becomes one of the line of the one of the stanzas of this poem. Our Borges has always remembered a great line in a poem written by Emily Dickinson. Our Borges recalls one of the wonderful line that is written by our Emily Dickinson, which can exemplify in a sense, give an example or an instance. Here we need to understand one thing. Here we need to understand the what precise words are. To give an example or an instance to this precise words, our Borges has taken the reference of the poem written by Emily Dickinson over here to make his readers to understand what precise words are, taking a reference of Emily Dickinson's poem. Here, to put all the readers to understand what precise words are, Borges has taken the example from a poem by Emily Dickinson. The poem's title is like this, that is, This Quiet Dust Was Gentlemen and Ladies. Here, students, you need to understand another thing, that is, this title of this poem has been repeated many times throughout the poem. That is why he has used in this second paragraph in a second line, this wonderful line in a poem, this quiet dust was gentlemen and ladies. This though it is a title, it gives us a different meaning rather than it seems to be. Here it has many precise words in it. This quiet dust was gentlemen and ladies. Here Emily Dickinson has written this poem after seeing the summer season. Here with the intention of referring to a summer season, our Emily Dickinson has written this title, This Quiet Dust Was Gentlemen and Ladies. The season, summer, is most likely winter. Here, no one in the present poem, no one, no children or gentlemen or no children or gentlemen are singing or playing out of their home, and bees and flower are not out nowhere. Any living organisms are found. This is what the death seems to be or appears to be. That's how the this quiet dust was, gentlemen and ladies. Here, this quiet dust in a sense, in the atmosphere of the summer, dust particles are everywhere in an atmosphere. In this atmosphere, no human being, other living creatures are not out. That's what I told you people. No children or gentlemen singing or playing in the ground, or they are not out of their home. It seems, it appears the death. It is a symbolification of the death, which means this quiet dust particles are settled on the ground. This quiet, as all the dust particles are all the as all the dust particles are settled on the ground, it represents the quiet dust, which means in another sense we can also understand all the dust particles sit very quietly doing nothing. It appears to be the dead one. This quiet dust was, gentlemen and ladies. This environment appears as if the death seems to be in this environment. The idea is banal, which means the idea that we get out of this line, out of this wonderful line, is banal, which means here we the readers oftenly or frequently or get bored after seeing this idea being repeated. That's what we call banal, which means banal in a sense. The word, the line, this quiet dust was, gentlemen and ladies, is repeated many times throughout the poem. That's what we call banal, which means it is this line is reused or repeated many times in the entire poem. That's how we the readers get bored after going through this line. This quiet dust was, gentlemen and ladies. The idea of dust and dust of death. Here, the dust which others to which sticks to ground seems as if it is a death. It all the atmosphere seems like a death. The idea of dust, here we have got the idea of the dust which is everywhere in an environment. This dust is like that of a death, as it is settled on the ground very simply, as it is as it others are sticks onto the ground. It seems like a death. We will all be dust one day. Here, this is an expression where we can get to see all the people one day be dust, like that of a dust, as it sticks onto a ground, which is similar to a death, which means we will one day die. We will die one day. We will take our presence out of this earth, as dust does in this poem. In the present context of this poem, we can understand that as this dust sticks onto a ground, as this is similar to a death, all the human beings one day will die is a cliche. which means here cliche is a common place where all the living organisms die one day. But what surprises is the praise, gentlemen and ladies. Here, praises is a group of small words combining together, which makes a conceptual unit. That's what we call a praise. It contains two or more words, but a small sentence it is. You need to understand one thing: praise is a small sentence containing two or more words in it, forming a conceptual unit. But what surprises us is the praise, gentlemen and ladies. Here, using of the gentlemen and ladies makes up precise words. These two words, gentlemen and ladies, are the precise words or the exact words that any poetry demands for, that any poetry seeks for from its poet or poetess. That's what brings a lot of surprise to us as we are the readers, which gives the magic, the word, the usage of the gentlemen and ladies as they are the precise or exact words give the magical give the magic which can attract the attention of the readers at the at what we call at the exact words, so that which gives the magic. It uh, it has a magical power in it, which means here the exact words have the magical power in their hand, so that they can attract the attention of the readers, at which every reader looks after the poetic quality. These poetic words, or what we call these exact words, gives a poetic quality too, containing a poetic act after using these precise words. If she had written men and women, it would have failed as poetry. If our Emily Dickinson had written men and women instead of using gentlemen and ladies, all of her efforts were in vain. All of her attempts were destroyed. The entire poem would have been failed as a poetry. It couldn't be called as a poetry at all. When if she had written men and women instead of using gentlemen and ladies, it would have failed as a poetry. As I told people earlier, there is a difference between a poetry and a poem. This is how we can bring out a distinction in between a poetry and a poem. Here it would have been a trivial one. Here it would have been the trivial one, which means what we call the poetry would have been failed if she used the word men and women. Here, if she had used a men and woman, it would have a smaller importance in it. That's what we call a trivial. Trivial in a sense, it has a small importance in it. That's what we call trivial. But finding the precise words she wrote, this quiet dust was gentlemen and ladies. In her attempts, our poetess Emily Dickinson was successful in finding out the precise words using this quiet dust was gentlemen and ladies, which gave a poetic quality and magic. So that as a poet and poetess, he or she has to find out or discover the exact words like gentlemen and ladies, as our Emily Dickinson does in her poem. So finding the precise words are more important for a poet or poetess while writing a poem like this, like this, this quiet dust was gentlemen and ladies. Olifano, you have said that metaphors exist from our very beginnings. From our very beginnings here, metaphors are seen in figures of speech where two objects are similar. Here, metaphors are figures of speech in which a word or phrase is used to bring a similarity between two different objects. To establish a similarity in between two different things, this metaphor can be used as a figures of speech which are unlike, but they are not they are not similar each other, only to bring a similarity in between both, in between the two different objects. These metaphors are used. Here Alifano is of the opinion that you have said that metaphors exist from our very beginnings, from the day when a writer has used when he has used to write his work, the metaphors exist, which means from the day when a writer starts writing his literature or literary work, from the day on these metaphors exist. These metaphors are in the midst of the writers. They are being used since the day when we start writing. This is what Olifano say here. Metaphors exist, or metaphors come into presence in the midst of all of us when we start writing from our very beginning. It is the day when we start writing our literature or literary work. Could you expound on that concept, Borges? Here, Olifano has asked Borges a question over here, that is, could you state this concept, Borges? This is what Olifano asks Borges here. Borges, yes, certainly. I believe that metaphors, if they are truly metaphors, exist from the very beginning of time. Yes, certainly. Borges accepts with what our Olifano tells him. Here, Borges admits that metaphors exist from the day when we start writing literature or literary work. This is how our Borges also accepts with the opinion of our Olifano also. I believe that metaphors, here Borges believes that all the metaphors that he has witnessed so far, if they are truly metaphors, if all the metaphors as they are observed by our Borges, if they are in fact metaphors, if they are truly metaphors, exist from the very beginning of time. It is of the opinion of our Borges that all the metaphors that are witnessed by himself, if they are truly metaphors, they must exist from the very beginning of time, from the day when the human start writing literary works, so that they must exist, or they must be in the midst of the writers when they start writing their literary works. They are to be used from the very beginning of time. The beginning of the time here is a representation of the time when we start writing literature or producing literature or literary works, but we express them differently. We can find different kinds of metaphors amidst us. Among all of us, we can observe or witness plenty of metaphors, but we express all the metaphors very differently. I have occasionally thought of reducing all the metaphors to five or six, which seem to me to be the essential metaphors. Here, our Borges occasionally, or we can say that from time to time, or at a time when he finds necessity to reduce them, when he finds necessity to reduce all the metaphors to a limited one into a five or six, he has done his job very easily, which means he has thought of reducing. Our Luis Borges has thought of reducing or making all the metaphors to a smaller, to a lesser number of metaphors, so that he thought of making all the metaphors into a lesser number of metaphors, so that he has made all the metaphors into a 5 or 6 in number. All the metaphors are reduced by our Louis Borges into 5 or 6 in number, which seem to me to be the essential metaphors. These 5 or 6 metaphors, though they are reduced by our Luis Borges, they seem to our Luis Borges to be the essential or necessary metaphors. They are the inevitable or necessary metaphors. They are very necessary to be the part of any literary work. They need to be found everywhere in all kinds of literature that a writer writes. So, these 5 or 6 metaphors are to be found or discovered everywhere in any literary work, any literary piece of work. Alifano, what are those metaphors? After receiving an answer from our Borges, Alifano has questioned him, asking him that what are those metaphors that you have reduced so far into 5 or 6. Borges, well, time and river. I told you people earlier what metaphors are. Metaphors are, I will repeat you, that is, metaphors are figures of speech in which a word or phrase is used to bring or make a comparison in between two objects. Here we have two objects, that is time and river. In between these two objects, time and river, we can bring out a comparison. That's how metaphors can be established in our literature. Well, it's a good question. Olifano now receives with an appreciation, telling our Olifano that time and a river are the examples of metaphors. Time and a river, both of them go on flowing. Both of them go on flowing. They never stop. They always keep going. That is how time and river do their work. This is how we can bring a similarity in between a time and river and life and dreams. In between these two different objects of a time and river, we can find out a similarity. In a life, life is nothing but a dream. We the people must dream ourselves to become or to find a status in a society. So, life is nothing but a dream. One has to dream himself or one has to dream himself or herself to find his position in a society, so that life and dreams, though they are two different objects, we can bring out a similarity in between them. Death and sleep, these two are the two different objects. Though they are different, we can certainly establish a similarity between them. Death is nothing but the sleep, which means sleep is nothing but a death. While sleeping, while when a man, when a person sleeps all alone unconsciously, it is similar to that of a death. There is no liveliness, there is no activity, there is an inactivity in the entire body. It is similar to that of a death. That's how we can bring out a similarity in between the two different objects, death and sleep. Stars and eyes, both of them are glittering. Though they are two different objects, they are shining each other, so that in this way we can bring out a similarity between them. Flowers and women. Women are always compared to flowers since the old age. Since that old age, woman has been compared to flowers. In this way, we can also bring a similarity in between flowers and women, though they are different from each other. These would be, I believe, the essential metaphors that are found in all literatures. According to our Borges, these five metaphors would be, according to him, as he believes, are the essential or necessary metaphors which are found in all sorts of literature that we read. Here, in all sorts or in all genres of literature, whatever the form it is, in all kinds of literature, we can find these five kinds of metaphors. In all kinds of literature, they are the part of any piece of literary work. This is how these five metaphors are reduced to be the essential metaphors by our Louis Borges. Then there are others that are whimsical. He is of the opinion that there are many others that are whimsical. There are many other metaphors existing in between in the midst of us, which are very whimsical or very strange. That's what we call whimsical in a sense, very strange, which we have been unfamiliar with. We are not known about those metaphors. That's what we call whimsical. There are other metaphors appearing in all kinds of literature, but they are whimsical or very strange. I believe that the poet's task is only to discover metaphors, even though they may already exist. Borges believes himself that the poet's task is only to discover metaphors. Only while writing any poem, or whether it may be a prose or an article or a journal, whatever the form it is in a literature, a poet's task is only to discover or find out the metaphors. Especially the metaphors are being used in a poetry. While writing a poetry, a poet's task or his job is only to find out the metaphors as they are used. Uh, Even though they may already exist, we can observe many metaphors existing amidst us. As they are existing, amidst us. A poet's task or a poet's job is only to find out them, to use them in his poetry. His only job is only to find out them. This is what do we see in the present context of the metaphors. Students, let us stop over here. I thank you all for listening to me all through the way. Thank you.